We deployed our strongest to crush the humans. None came back. The order left my hand at exactly 3 minutes past the 6th hour of the cycle, and by the time the ink had dried on the authorization, sealed 12 of the most powerful warships in the Kth Dominion were already warming their drives. I did not go to the observation deck to watch them leave. I had done that once years ago, when I was young enough to find ceremony meaningful. Now I stood at my desk, poured a measure of cold grain water into a clay cup, and listened to the floor hum as the launch bays cycled. Below, the vibration traveled up through the soles of my boots. It felt like a heartbeat. It felt like certainty. My name is Vorith Kaith. I have held the rank of High Admiral for 19 years. In that time, I have authorized 41 military operations across 6 contested sectors. 39 of those operations ended exactly as planned. One ended faster than planned. One lasted 2 weeks longer than projected, because of a supply chain disruption that had nothing to do with the enemy. I have never, not once, looked at a tactical summary and thought, we might lose this. I do not think that now. Either the War Council had been divided, which was unusual. Counselor Aldrin, who handled finance, wanted a slower approach, a blockade economic pressure, the quiet tightening of trade access, old man thinking, the kind that assumes your opponent is willing to negotiate their own surrender if you make things inconvenient enough. Counselor Maron agreed with him. She always agreed with him. The two of them had been aligned on every vote for 11 years, and I had long since stopped being surprised by it. The other 4 council members had looked at the same intelligence reports I had, drawn the same conclusions, and voted with me. Humanity was a problem that had grown past acceptable size. It had started small. It always does. A species achieves interstellar capability, and there is a brief window, sometimes a generation, sometimes 2, where they're clumsy, careful, eager to please. They make agreements they do not fully understand. They accept trade terms that favor the older powers because they do not yet know what they are worth. They are new, and newness makes species humble. Humanity had been humble for exactly 22 years after their first contact with the Kth Dominion. Then they stopped. It was not a single moment. I had read the reports carefully, enough to see the pattern. Renegotiated mineral contract here. Politely declined military partnership. There, a border station built 11 km inside what the Kth considered our zone of influence, staffed by human engineers who smiled pleasantly when our inspectors arrived and offered them refreshments and produced a document showing that the coordinates in the original agreement had been misread. Clerical error. Terribly sorry. The station stays, and then the colonies, 7 of them in 4 years, all placed on worlds the Kth had flagged as future development targets, each one legal by some narrow technical reading of the shared space accords, each one slightly further into our projected expansion corridor. The humans were not pushing back against us. They were simply building the way water builds behind a dam, quiet and steady, and accumulating mass. The intelligence division had flagged it as low-level concern for 2 years, then medium concern, then 8 months ago, high concern after a human commercial fleet passed through the Darren corridor, a route that traveled directly through the center of what the Kth consider our territorial heart, and when our patrol ship hailed them and Asked their business, the lead human. Captain said simply that they were transiting, that transit rights have been established in the original contact accords and that they expected to be through in 6 hours, and they were. And they left no damage and committed no aggression and filed all the correct paperwork, and somehow that was more concerning than anything that had preceded it, because they knew they had read the original accords more carefully than we had written them, found every door we had left unlocked, and began walking through those doors while smiling at us. The War Council had agreed this ends now. I had agreed it ends now. The Veth Armada was the right instrument. 12 ships. The flagship, the Kareth, was 300 m of reinforced out and weapons arrays that could reduce city to rubble from low orbit, flanking. It were 4 cruiser-class vessels, each crewed by 84 soldiers, each carrying enough firepower to hold a contested planetary approach for 6 days without resupply. Behind those 7 strike-class ships, fast and aggressive, designed to cut off retreat and disable communication arrays in the opening seconds of an engagement. The commander I had assigned was a soldier named Veth Aryan. I had selected him personally. He had led the suppression campaign in the Ral sector 14 years ago, a campaign that had broken 3 separate resistance fleets in 11 weeks. He was not imaginative. Imaginative soldiers were unpredictable. Aryan was methodical, relentless, and he had the particular quality I valued most in a field commander. He did not stop until the job was done. The intelligence package I gave him was thorough. Humanity had approximately 40 vessels operating in the contested corridor. Most were commercial or survey ships. Their military presence in the region consisted of 9 warships, 3 of which were classified by our analysts as light patrol craft, not frontline combat vessels. The remaining 6 were designated as heavy class, but our technical division had reviewed everything they could gather on human ship design and rated their offensive capability as comparable to our medium cruisers, not their equal. Comparable meaning slightly inferior in firepower, slightly inferior in shielding, crewed by soldiers who had never fought a war against an opponent of Cath capability. Aaron had looked at the package, asked 3 clarifying questions about the asteroid belt near the 4th planet, because he wanted to know if it was a viable retreat corridor for the humans. Received his answers, nodded once, and said he would have the sector secured within 10 days. I told him 12 to be safe. He looked mildly offended by the extra 2 days, which told me I had chosen correctly. The morning after the Armada departed, I attended a regular council session. Aldrin raised the issue of a water rights dispute in the outer colony network. Marin proposed a new tariff structure for imported grain from the Western Territories. I approved the tariff, deferred the water dispute to a working committee, and ate a small lunch at my desk while reading 3 separate updates from other sectors, none of which required my direct attention. The afternoon passed without incident. Evening passed without incident. I slept well. I remember that specifically. I slept with the comfortable weight of a problem in the process of being solved. 3 days after the Armada's departure, Aaron's fleet was due to make its first scheduled check-in, a brief signal. Nothing more. Position confirmation. Status clear, proceeding on course. Standard protocol. The check-in window was 30 minutes long, beginning at the second hour of the cycle. At the second hour of the cycle, I was in my office, reviewing infrastructure report from the Southern Expansion Zone. My communications officer, a young man named Corin, knew to interrupt me only if something required immediate attention. He had been in the role for 2 years. He was good at reading the room. At the second hour and 40 minutes he knocked. I told him to enter. He said the check-in window had closed. I looked up from the infrastructure report. He said there had been no signal. I held his gaze for a moment and then asked if there was any disruption in the communication network. He said no, all other relay stations were operating normally. The silence was specific to the Veth Armada's assigned frequency. I told him to note it in the log and extend the listening window by an additional 6 hours. Sometimes signals were delayed. FTL communication was reliable but not perfect. There were pockets of interference near certain stellar formations, and the Armada's route passed close enough to a mid-mass star that some degradation was theoretically possible. Corin wrote it down and left. I returned to the infrastructure report. I read the same paragraph 4 times before I understood it. The 6-hour extension produced nothing. I told no one in the council. There was nothing to tell yet. A missed check-in was not an emergency. Orin was not the kind of commander who sent unnecessary signals. It was entirely possible he had entered a communication dark phase of the operation deliberately, perhaps because he had made contact with a human fleet and did not want to risk a transmission being intercepted. That was sound thinking. That was exactly the kind of disciplined operational behavior I had selected him for. I extended the listening window again another 12 hours. At the end of those 12 hours, I poured a cup of cold grain water, stood at the window of my office that looked out over the lower city, and began for the first time to be aware of a feeling I did not have a comfortable name for. It was not fear. I'd been in dangerous situations. I knew what fear felt like. This was something quieter and more patient. It sat in the back of my chest like a weight that had not yet declared its full size. I drafted a message to Orin, marked urgent, and sent it through the priority relay. I asked for a status report. I asked for confirmation of position. I asked for anything, and then I waited. Across the next 4 days, the weight in my chest declared itself. Piece by piece, no response came. At the end of the 4th day, I authorized the deployment of a scout ship, a single small vessel, fast and lightly armed, crewed by 5. Its task was simple: travel to the last known position of the Veth Armada, gather whatever information was available, and return. I marked the mission classified. The crew were told only that they were performing a communication relay inspection. They were young, all 5 of them. Good sailors. I watched their departure from the observation deck. I did not tell the council. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself that Orin was fine, the Armada was fine. There was an explanation that would arrive any moment, and it would be embarrassingly simple, and I would feel foolish for having worried. I went back to my desk and read infrastructure reports, and ate my meals, and attended council sessions, and voted on tariff structures, and nodded at the appropriate moments, and said the appropriate things, and the whole time underneath all of it, the Weight sat in my chest and grew. 9 days after the Armada's departure, the scout ship called in. Korn came to my office at the 4th hour of the cycle, earlier than he had ever knocked before. His face when he entered was the face of a young man trying very hard to show nothing. He said the scout ship had reached the designated sector, he said. The pilot had transmitted a message. He said the message had cut off mid-sentence. I stood up from my desk. Corin handed me the transcript. The words were printed on a single thin sheet. I read them once, then again. Then I set the sheet down very carefully on the surface of my desk, as if it were fragile, as though the words written on it might shatter if I handled them wrong. The pilot had written, "There. Still here, all of them, and they are." And then nothing. The scout ship's signal had not dropped out. It had not been lost to interference. The transmission had simply stopped the way a voice stops when the person speaking it no longer can. I stood very still in my office for a long time. Outside the window, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Lights came on in the lower districts. Somewhere far below, someone was cooking something that smelled faintly of spice and smoke. Ordinary things, the kind of things that happen when the world does not know it, should be holding its breath. I picked up the transcript again. They're still here, all of them still here. Armada. 12 ships crewed by hundreds of Caith soldiers in a sector where they were supposed to fight and win and come home. Still there, not gone, not destroyed, or at least not gone from that location. Still present, which meant the humans had not simply defeated the Veth Armada. They had kept it. I sat down in my chair. I put my hands flat on the desk. I breathed slowly and carefully, the way I'd been taught to breathe during my command training, the technique they called the steady hold, designed to keep a commander functional when the situation had moved beyond what they had planned for. I breathed in, I breathed out. I did not feel steady, and they are what had the pilot seen? What had stopped that transmission, pulled the words back before they could land? I did not know. And for the first time in 19 years, not knowing felt like the most dangerous condition in the world. The council session the next morning was about water rights again. Aldrin had revised his position. Marin had prepared a counter proposal. 2 other counselors argued about the economic implications of subsurface drilling access in the outer territories. I sat at the head of the table and looked at each of them in turn and said the things a high admiral says when he is running a meeting, and the whole time I was thinking about 12 warships sitting in a distant sector, still there, not coming home, and a scout pilot whose last words had been cut away before they could tell me what he had seen. I voted to defer the water rights issue to the next session. I returned to my office. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, and then I began to write the report I had promised myself I would never have to write, the one that would tell the council that the Veth Armada had not checked in, that the scout was gone, and that something in human space was not what any of us had believed it to be. I did not send it that night. I sat with it on my desk and looked at it, and outside the window, the city burned with ordinary light, and somewhere out there, beyond the edge of everything I understood, 12 of my best ships were waiting in a sector controlled by a species I had dismissed as manageable. I picked up a cup of grain water. It had gone cold long ago. I drank it anyway. The morning brought no new signals. It brought something else instead, at the first hour of the 7th cycle. After the Armada's departure, proximity alert sounded from the station's outer detection array. Korn came to my door at a pace that was almost running, but that he held back to a fast walk out of trained discipline. His composure, I noticed, had further eroded. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there a week ago. He said a ship had emerged from FDL at the edge of the system. He said it was one of ours. He said it was the Kareth. I was already moving. The Kareth was Aran's flagship, the largest vessel. The Armada, 300 of the finest military engineering the Kayath had ever built. I had watched it leave the station 11 days ago, proud and heavy and certain. It came in now on automatic navigation, no active drive, drifting on its last, heading like a leaf carried by water. The approach was wrong, the speed was wrong. A vessel that size on approach to a station uses active correction. Constantly small adjustments, the careful dance of mass and momentum. Managed by comp and crew, the Kareth was not correcting, the Kareth was drifting. I went to the docking bay with Corin and 4 of the station security officers. We boarded through the secondary airlock after the automated systems confirmed a stable atmosphere. Inside, the lights were on. The air recyclers were running. The temperature was correct. Every system that should have been active was active. The ship was empty, not damaged, not burnt, not torn open by weapons fire. Intact, perfectly, completely intact, down to the equipment stored in the lower cargo bays and the personal items in each crew member's quarters and the half-finished meals in the commissary that had been left exactly where they were placed, as though everyone had simply stood up from the table and walked away. We searched every compartment, we checked every room, we looked in places that made no sense to look because we needed to look everywhere before we could accept that there was nothing to find. 312 crew members, not one remained. I stood in Aran's command chair room, the private office attached to the bridge where a flagship commander plans and thinks and sleeps when the ship demands it. And I looked at his desk, and on that desk there was a single item that had not been there when he left. Sealed data chip, small plane, the kind used for basic audiovisual recordings. It had been placed precisely in the center of the desk. I picked it up. I carried it to the bridge. I sat in the command chair, Oran's chair, the chair of the man I had sent to finish this quickly, and I inserted the chip into the playback port. The screen came on. A human was looking at me. He was not what I had expected, though I would have been hard-pressed to say exactly what I had expected. He was middle-aged with calm eyes and short hair going gray at the sides. He wore a plain uniform with no visible rank insignia. He was seated, his hands resting loosely on a table in front of him, and his expression was so completely relaxed that it took me a moment to understand that it was not indifference, it was patience, the patience of someone who has done the difficult thing already and now simply has to explain it. He said, "My name is Owen Grant. I am speaking to whoever finds this ship, if you're the person who authorized the operation that ended 11 days ago, then this message is for you specifically. If you're someone else, please pass it to that person." He paused just briefly, just enough to take one easy breath. He said, "Fleet came into our space. We let approach. We engaged it on our terms at a time of our choosing, in a manner that made the outcome predictable from the first minute. Your soldiers fought with discipline and courage. I want you to know that they did what soldiers do when they believe in their orders. The problem was not the soldiers. He looked directly into the recording device, directly at me or at whoever was sitting in this chair. He said the problem was the assumption. He said you assumed you understood what you were dealing with. You gathered information and you read it. And you drew conclusions, and every single one of those conclusions was wrong in ways you did not know to check. For I'm not saying this to make you feel foolish. I am saying it because the next decision you make will be based on this information, and I would like that decision to be an informed one. He leaned forward very slightly. He said, your people are alive, all of them. They're being held in conditions that are safe and appropriate. They will be treated with dignity for as long as negotiations remain a possibility. We have no interest in unnecessary harm. We have never had any interest in unnecessary harm. That is something else you did not know to check for. Then he said, my question to you is simple. Do you want to know where your soldiers are and come and talk, or do you want to send more? He looked at the recording device for one more moment. Then he said, I genuinely hope you choose the first option. And the recording ended. I sat in Goran's chair on Goran's empty ship and looked at the blank screen outside. Through the bridge viewport, the station's lights were steady and bright. Against the dark, I sat there for a very long time. Then I took the data chip, sealed in my coat pocket, and walked back to the airlock and crossed back to the station and went to my office and sat down at my desk, and I looked at the report I had written the night before, the one I had not yet sent to the council. I added 3 new lines to the bottom of it. I still did not send it because the moment I send it, the decision would belong to all of them, to Aldrin and his tariffs and his careful ledgers, to Marin and her consensus and her discomfort with anything uncertain, to the 4 others who had voted for the Armada with the confidence of people who have never watched certainty dissolve in real time. They would read the report and they would panic, or they would posture, or they would do the thing that councils do when they feel they have been embarrassed, which is to respond with something large and loud and immediately visible. They would send more, and something in me, some part that had been listening very carefully to Owen Grant's unhurried voice and watching his patient hands on that table, thought that is precisely what he expected us to do. I opened the report. I read the 3 new lines I had added. Then I sat very still, and I thought about what it means to be a high admiral who has just been handed a question by the enemy, and what it means to answer it correctly, and whether I was the kind of man who could tell the difference. The clock on my desk marked the hours. I did not sleep, and in the morning the council session began, and I walked in and sat at the head of the table, and before Aldrin could open mouth about water rights, I laid the report on the table and said, we need to talk. I watched their faces as they read. I thought about the empty ship drifting in on automatic. I thought about 312 missing soldiers who were, according to a calm human voice on a plane recording, alive and being treated with dignity. I thought about the question, do you want to know where your soldiers are, or do you want to send more? Around the table the council finished reading, and then, as I had Known they would, they began to argue. And as I listened to them argue, I made my decision. Not yet, I would not announce it yet. Let them argue. Let them exhaust the easy answers. Let them reach the bottom of what they thought they knew, and then I would tell them what we were going to do. What I did not know yet, what I could not have known sitting in that room while my counselors argued, and the data chip sat heavy in my coat pocket, was that the decision I was about to make would be the wrong one, not because I lacked information, because I still had not asked the right question, and it would take everything that happened next for me to understand what the right question was. I voted with the council to send more ships. I told myself it was because I had no choice. I still believe that was a lie. The Second Fleet departed 6 days after the council voted. 40 warships, every combat-ready vessel the Keth Dominion could assemble in that window. I had argued briefly for a smaller response, not out of caution. I had lost the luxury of appearing cautious, but because 40 ships felt like panic wearing armor. It felt like exactly the kind of response that announces to the galaxy that you are afraid. The council disagreed. Unanimously, I signed the authorization. And then I did something I had not done since my first command 30 years ago. I packed a travel case, walked down to the docking bay, boarded the new flagship, a heavy command vessel called the Verith, larger than the Keth, newer with twice the weapons capacity, and I assigned myself as the operations commanding officer. Corin asked me quietly why I was going. I told him I needed to ensure the operation was handled correctly. He did not look like he believed me. He was too good at his job for that. The truth was simpler and harder. If I was going to send 40 ships into whatever had swallowed the first 12, I could not stand on a station and wait for another empty flagship to drift home. I could not hold another data chip in my hands and watch another recording. I needed to see it, whatever it was that the humans had done, whatever it was that Iran had met at the end of his voyage and had not survived to report. I needed to see it with my own eyes, because a high admiral who does not understand what killed his best fleet has no business sending another one, even if understanding came too late. The fleet jumped to FTL at the 3rd hour of the cycle. I stood on the bridge of the Verith and watched the stars stretch and compress and fold into the tunnel of faster-than-light travel. And I thought about the recording. I had watched it 11 more times since that first viewing in Iran's chair. I had memorized the precise cadence of Owen Grant's voice, the way he breathed before he said, the problem was the assumption, the way his hand stayed still on the table even when his words carried weight. I had never interrogated a prisoner, but I had read transcripts of interrogations, hundreds of them across years of command, and I had learned to recognize the difference between a person who is performing calm and a person who has arrived at it. Performance is held, it costs effort, it shifts. True calm is just present, like weather, like gravity. Owen Grant had been truly calm. That bothered me more than anything else in the recording. 3 days into the journey, I called a command meeting with the fleet's senior officers, 12 people around a table in the Verith's briefing room, each of them responsible for 3 to 4 vessels. They were experienced, several of them had led operations I had personally overseen. They sat with the straight backs of people who had been told They're going into something significant and are determined not to show what that does to them. I gave them the full briefing, everything, the armadas, silence, the empty carafe, the recording, all of it. I had been advised by 2 council members to withhold some of this from the field officers to preserve morale, they said, to prevent uncertainty from spreading. I had ignored that advice. Soldiers who go into an engagement without accurate information are soldiers who die for reasons that could have been avoided. After I finished, there was a silence. Then a woman named Della, who commanded 4 of the strike class vessels and who had the reputation of being the sharpest tactician in the fleet, said, "You watched the recording 11 times, I said. I had, she said. What was the detail you kept going back to? I said, he told me my soldiers fought with discipline and courage, she said. And I said, a man who has just defeated 12 warships without losing a single vessel of his own does not need to say something like that. He said it anyway. I've been trying to understand why the room was quiet. I said, I think he said it because he wanted me to know he saw them not as an obstacle, as people, and that distinction concerns me more than anything else about this situation." Della looked at me for a moment. She said, "You think they're better than our intelligence reports suggested?" I said, "I think our intelligence reports were assembled by analysts who were looking for the data that confirmed what the council already believed." No one argued with that. I dismissed the meeting and returned to the bridge and sat in the command chair and looked at the tunnel of FTL around us and thought about the question I still had not figured out how to answer. On the 5th day, we dropped out of FTL. At the edge of the targeted sector, the system opened in front of us on the long-range sensors, a mid-sized star for planets and asteroid belt looping around the 3rd planet. The 4th planet was the furthest human colony in this region, a settlement, according to our intelligence, of approximately 12,000 people, mostly engineers and their families, building out a new habitat in a system that had been uninhabited before they arrived, and a human fleet it was. On the sensors within 30 seconds of our emergence, I stared at the numbers, 17 ships. I had 40. My weapons officer, a quiet man named Lars, turned from his station and looked at me and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. We had more than twice their numbers. We had newer ships, heavier weapons, more experienced crews, and this time we were not arriving with assumptions. We were arriving with 40 warships and the full weight of CAF military capability, and the specific intention to not repeat whatever mistake Iran had made. I gave the order to hold position and establish communication. I wanted one more look at the board before anything happened, one more minute to read the geometry of what I was looking at. The 17 human ships were arranged in a pattern I did not immediately recognize. They were not in a defensive formation, not grouped behind the planet, not positioned to use the asteroid belt as cover. They were spread across the approach corridor in a shape that was almost relaxed, if a fleet can be said to be relaxed, like a hand opened rather than a fist made. Lars said, "Admiral, their weapon systems are not powered." I said, "Say that again." He said, "I am reading their ships at minimal combat readiness. Weapons are offline, shields at standby levels. They are essentially running on navigation power only." I looked at the Display 17 ships in the middle of the approach corridor to their colony. Weapons offline waiting, a thought. Moved through me, slow and cold and wrong shape, the kind of thought that does not fit into any of the categories. You are prepared for it, they're not. Trying to fight us, they know we are. Here, the sensors work both directions. They saw us emerge from FDL the same moment we saw them, and they powered nothing down, which means their weapons were already offline before we arrived, which means they came here like this, unarmed in posture, in the path of a fleet 4 times larger than their own, in a sector where they had already defeated 12 of our warships. I said, open a communication channel. Corin, I had brought him with me because he was good and because I trusted him. Open the channel, and a face appeared on the main screen. It was Owen Grant, the same man, the same calm eyes, the same plain uniform. I had watched his recorded face 11 times, and here was his living face. And it was the same, unhurried, present. Patient, he said. Hi, Admiral Cowan. I expected it would be you. I'm glad you came in person. It will make this easier. I said, where are my soldiers? He said, safe as I told you they would be. They are on the station behind us, the one in orbit of the 4th planet. You can scan it if you want. I will wait. I told Lars to scan. Lars scanned. He said quietly that he was reading approximately 312 life signs in the station's residential section. Keth biosignatures alive. I looked at Owen Grant. I said, you held an open channel and let me scan your station. He said, yes. I said, why are your weapons offline? He said, because this is not a combat situation. I said, I have 40 warships pointed at your 17. He said, I know, but you're not here to fight. You are here to understand. You just don't know that yet. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said, explain what happened to my armada. And he did. He spoke for 20 minutes. I did not interrupt. I let him finish, and when he finished, I sat in the command chair of the Verith in total silence. And around me the bridge crew was also silent because they had heard it too. And what he had told us was not a boast. It was not a performance. It was a clear, methodical account of what the Keth military doctrine had failed to account for, laid out with the same patience he had shown in the recording. Like explaining something a student has been struggling with. He told me that the intelligence our analysts had gathered on human military capability was accurate in terms of raw numbers. 9 warships in the region. He confirmed that what the intelligence had missed was everything that mattered. It had missed the 12 unmanned drone platforms disguised as derelict survey equipment positioned throughout the asteroid belt, each one capable of independent combat operation and coordinated by a system that did not require a human crew to function. It had missed the fact that the 9 human warships were not conventional vessels, but had been refitted specifically for the kind of engagement the Cath were likely to attempt, rapid, overwhelming, expecting minimal resistance. It had missed that the human military had been watching the Cath expansion pattern for 11 years, and it spent 7 of those years preparing for exactly this confrontation. It had missed that what looked like 9 warships and an undefended colony was in fact a closed trap designed not to destroy the Cath armada but to capture it whole, because the humans had calculated that a captured fleet was more useful than a destroyed one. because captured soldiers are evidence, because evidence is what you bring to negotiation. I said, you did all of this to force a negotiation. He said, we did all of this to survive. Negotiation is just the method we prefer. I said, you could have negotiated at any point in the last 11 years. He said, we tried 3 times. The council declined each time. The 4th attempt, they did not respond at all. We adjusted our approach. I thought about the renegotiated contracts, the border station with the apologetic engineers, the transit through the Darren corridor, 11 years of quiet accumulation. We adjusted our approach. They had not been expanding carelessly. They had been building a position from which they could not be removed by force without cost, a position from which they could say when the time came, here we are, and here are your people, and here are the terms, and this time the council will respond. I said, what are they? Terms, he said, straightforward ones. Formal recognition of human territorial claims in the expansion corridor. Guaranteed transit rights through Cathar space under a jointly administered framework, a standing diplomatic channel with a response guarantee of no more than 30 days, and the return of all your soldiers unharmed. Today without conditions, because we are not interested in prisoners, we are interested in a border. I said, those terms will require council approval. He said, I know, take them back and get it. We will hold this position until you return. There is no urgency on our end. We have time. I looked at him. I said, you are not concerned that we might use that time to assemble a larger force? He said, you can try. And then, for the first time in the entire conversation, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not threat, something quieter and more final, like a door that has always been open and is now simply revealing how deep the room behind it goes. He said, High Admiral, I want to be direct with you, not as adversaries, but as two people who are both trying to make a decision that affects a very large number of lives. What you have sent against us twice has not worked, not because of luck, because of a gap between what you believe about us and what is actually true. That gap does not close by sending more ships. It closes by having a conversation. I am offering you the conversation. I would genuinely prefer that you take it. The bridge was completely silent. Lars was not looking at his instruments. Korn was not looking at the communication panel. Everyone was looking at the screen. I thought about Iran, methodical and relentless, selecting his approach routes and asking his 3 precise questions and saying he would have it done in 10 days. I thought about the half-finished meals in the Caritas commissary. I thought about the weight in my chest that had been growing since the first mischeck-in, the weight that had come with me across the jump and through 5 days of FTL and was still here, sitting exactly where it had always been, patient as stone. I thought about Owen Grant telling me my soldiers had fought with discipline and courage when he had not needed to say anything of the kind. I opened a private channel to Della. I said, your assessment, she said, everything he has described is consistent with what we should have found in the intelligence. And didn't the drone platforms explain the first engagement, the refit vessels explain why the Caritas came home undamaged? They were not trying to destroy it, they were trying to preserve it as a message. I said, and the second engagement? She was quiet for a moment. She said, Admiral, we are in The approach corridor to a system that has already defeated the Veth Armada. We have 40 ships with weapons powered. They have 17 ships with weapons offline. This is not a battlefield. This is a demonstration, and I think we should think carefully about what we are being shown. I closed the private channel. I looked at Owen Grant on the screen. He was waiting patiently, hands on the table. I thought about 40 ships and 17. I thought about the drone platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. I thought about what else might be hidden in places our sensors had not thought to look. In a system that had been built as a position for 11 years, I thought, if I give you order and it goes wrong, there is no empty flagship coming home this time. And then I thought something else, something I had not let myself think before, because it was the kind of thought that changes a person's career. If anyone finds out they had it, I thought, he is right. The problem was not the soldiers. The problem was the assumption, and I had come here with 40 ships and the same assumption, dressed in heavier armor and every single thing Owen Grant had said in the last 20 minutes pointed to the same outcome I had gotten the first time. I sat very still, and then I opened the main channel again. I said, Owen Grant. He said, yes, Admiral. I said, I am prepared to carry your terms back to the Council. I cannot guarantee their response. I will not make a promise I cannot keep. He said, I understand. I said, but I will tell you what I can guarantee. I will tell them exactly what you told me. I will not soften it, and I will not reframe it. I will put the terms on the table in the same language you used. What they do with that is their decision. He looked at me. He said, that is more than I expected. I said, then perhaps you should also recalibrate your assumptions. The smallest thing moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, something that acknowledged the point. He said, perhaps we both should. The prisoner transfer took 4 hours. 312 Kaith soldiers in good health returned to the fleet by human shuttle, each one carrying a written record of their treatment and care during captivity. The documents were thorough. Every meal, every medical check, every day accounted for, not because they had to be, because the humans had made them. Anyway, I reviewed the documents in my cabin that evening. Then I drafted my report to the Council. I wrote it carefully. I chose every word with the same precision I would give to a weapons authorization, because I understood, sitting in that cabin on a ship that had not fired a single shot, that words were what I had to work with now, and they had to be correct. I did not recommend resumption of hostilities. I recommended immediate acknowledgement of the human terms as a starting framework. I expected the Council to push back. I expected Aldrin and his ledgers and Marin and her consensus building to find 100 reasons why the terms needed to be modified, delayed, studied, reviewed by committee. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling of the cabin and thought about the empty commissary on the Kareth, the half-finished meals, the precise placement of a single data chip on a commander's desk. They are still here, all of them, and they are alive, all 312 of them, alive and documented and returned without conditions, just as he had promised they would be. I thought about 11 years of careful preparation, about doors left unlocked and walked through, and border stations built with apologetic engineers, and transit rights exercised with perfectly filed paperwork. I thought about a species that had looked at the Kth Dominion, read its original accords more carefully than we had written them, and begun quietly and patiently to make itself into something we could not remove by force without paying a price we could not afford. We adjusted our approach. I thought about those words for a long time, then I transmitted the report. And in the morning, when the fleet jumped back into FTL toward home, I stood on the bridge of the Varith and watched the stars folding around us, and I was not thinking about the council's response or the political implications, or what this would do to my career. I was thinking about Owen Grant's hands on the table, still patient, the hands of a man who had already done the difficult thing and was now simply waiting for the other side to catch up. I thought that is what it looks like when you are not afraid, not because there is nothing to fear, but because you have already looked at what frightens you and made a plan for it years in advance, and the plan worked, and now you're sitting at a table in a plain room and you are calm. Not because calm is easy, but because it is the only thing left to be. I thought about the question he had asked in the recording. Do you want to know where your soldiers are, or do you want to send more? I'd send more, and then I had gone with them, and here I was. I thought the right question was never the one he asked me. The right question was the one I should have asked before any of this began. Not can we defeat them, not how quickly can this be resolved, not even what are they capable of. The right question was, what kind of people are they? And the answer I now knew was the one that changed everything. They were the kind of people who returned your soldiers without conditions, who told you your fleet had fought with courage when they did not have to, who left half-finished meals in a commissary untouched because they had moved an entire crew without disturbing a single thing, because they were precise and they were careful, and they saw no reason to be cruel when they could simply be effective. They were the kind of people who spent 11 years preparing for a war they did not want in order to make it unnecessary. I called them manageable. I sat on my bridge and I looked at the folded light of FTL travel, and I felt for the first time since the first mischeck in the weight in my chest begin to shift, not disappear. It would not disappear for a long time, maybe never, but shift, because on the other side of it, beneath all the dread and the certainty that had crumbled, and the 12 warships that had gone somewhere they did not return from, there was something else, something that surprised me, something that felt cautiously like the beginning of understanding. I was going home to face a council that would be angry and frightened and determined to find a way to frame this as something other than what it was. I was going to put the terms on the table in plain language, the way I had promised. I was going to sit at the head of that table, and the council that the Vetha matter was gone. The Second Fleet had accomplished nothing, and a species we had dismissed as manageable had outthought us at every step for 11 years, and was now offering us the thing they had always wanted, a conversation. I did not know if they would listen, but I would tell them. I would tell them all of it, every detail, without softening or reframing. I would tell them about 312 soldiers returned in good health with written documentation of their care. I would tell them about weapons powered down in the path of 40 warships, because the humans had done the calculation and decided it was unnecessary to aim at us when they had already made their point. I would tell them about a man named Owen Grant sitting at a plain table with still hands asking a question he already knew the answer to, and at the end of all of it I would tell them what I had realized sitting in that command chair, looking at 17 unarmed ships waiting quietly in the corridor to their home. We had deployed our strongest, none had come back, not because they were destroyed, because the humans had looked at our strongest and said, "We do not need to destroy you, we just need to stop you," and they had stopped us completely, thoroughly, without a single one of our soldiers losing their life, without a single vessel lost on either side, by being in every way that counted more prepared, more patient, and more clear about what they actually wanted than we had ever been. I had spent my career believing that strength was the final argument, that when everything else failed, the largest fleet won, and the question was settled. I had been wrong. Strength is only the final argument when the other side has no other arguments left. Humanity had saved all of its other arguments for 11 years. It had built them carefully and hidden them in asteroid belts and filed them in original contact accords and used them precisely when they were needed, and now they were offering us a seat at a table and a 30-day response guarantee and a jointly administered transit framework. I was going to recommend that we take it, not because I was certain the Council would agree, not because I was certain it was the right outcome for the Kth Dominion in every calculation that could be applied to it, because Owen Grant had looked me in the eye through a communication channel with 40 warships, pointed at him and spoken to me as though I was capable of making a good decision, and I intended to prove him right. The stars folded around the fleet. We went home, and behind us, in a system orbiting a mid-sized star near the edge of human space, a colony of 12,000 people went about the ordinary business of building something new on a world that was theirs, in a corridor that was theirs, in a future they had made sure of quietly over 11 patient years. They did not celebrate. They did not need to. They had never wanted a war. They had simply refused to lose one.